What if something invisible feeds on your fatigue? What if the weariness you feel at the end of each day is not only the result of work or stress, but part of a deeper process in which unseen forces quietly draw from your soul? Rudolf Steiner once said that modern humanity lives amid a constant exchange between visible and invisible worlds. He believed that every thought, every emotion, every reaction is not isolated. It sends ripples through the spiritual fabric that surrounds us. In this ocean of subtle life, energy never stands still. It flows, it transforms, and it is consumed. According to Steiner, the human being is not merely flesh and bone, but a radiant being of layered energies. Beneath the physical surface lies the etheric body, a shimmering field of life forces that sustains growth and vitality. Interwoven with it is the astral body, the vessel of desire, emotion, and imagination. And at the center of it all shines the I, the immortal spark of divine individuality. Together, these form the bridge between earth and spirit. But when this bridge weakens, when thought becomes mechanical, when feeling turns chaotic, energy leaks through the cracks of our own consciousness. Steiner saw this draining not as a metaphor, but as a real phenomenon within the spiritual ecology of existence. Just as physical organisms feed on plants or other creatures, certain invisible beings feed on the energies of the human soul. They are drawn to vibration, to intensity, whether of pain or pleasure, and their sustenance comes from the radiations of our inner life. Some are harmless, even part of nature's balance. Others, however, distort that balance, binding the human being in endless cycles of emotion and distraction, so that the flow of energy continues without pause. Imagine a person who spends their days rushing from one task to another, reacting, worrying, complaining. Each moment of unconscious emotion releases waves into the unseen atmosphere. These waves are not lost, they are absorbed. The human being, unaware of the exchange, becomes both the source and the offering. This is why Steiner spoke of modern life as a battlefield of attention. Every impulse we surrender to without awareness becomes nourishment for forces that thrive on confusion and fatigue. And yet, Steiner's message was not one of fear, but of awakening. He taught that awareness itself is power. When a person learns to observe their thoughts and feelings without drowning in them, the leaks begin to close. The etheric field strengthens. The soul becomes luminous again. What once escaped as nourishment for lower realms now rises upward as creative energy, as will, as light. To live consciously, then, is not a luxury. It is an act of spiritual protection. Every moment of clear attention, every breath taken with presence, is a reclaiming of the energy that has long been unconsciously given away. The human being who awakens to this truth discovers that they are not a victim of invisible forces, but a sun whose rays, once scattered, can be gathered back into a single radiant flame. Rudolf Steiner described human beings as luminous structures, built not only from matter, but from currents of life that extend far beyond the visible form. What animates us, he said, is a hierarchy of subtle bodies that interweave to create consciousness itself. The etheric body gives us growth, healing, and memory. The silent rhythm that keeps the heart beating and the plants of our inner garden alive. The astral body brings movement, emotion, and desire. It is where joy, anger, and curiosity burn as living colors. And at the center, the I, or higher self, acts as the conductor of this orchestra. When the harmony is maintained, energy flows upward and outward, and the human being shines like a beacon in the spiritual world. But harmony is fragile. Each thought and feeling carries a vibration, and these vibrations travel through the subtle fields, like waves across a lake. When we think clearly, the waves are smooth, luminous, and nourishing. When we are agitated, anxious, or envious, the waves distort and scatter. Steiner explained that this distortion is not merely psychological. It alters the substance of our life body. The etheric currents weaken, creating openings through which vitality seeps away. Energy is not destroyed, it moves elsewhere, drawn into realms that vibrate with the same frequency as our unguarded emotion. The cosmos, in Steiner's teaching, is not an empty space, but a living organism filled with beings of every kind. Some exist to uplift, to guide, to illuminate the path of evolution. Others depend on the dense emissions of fear, lust, or anger to sustain their own existence. They are not embodiments of evil in the old sense, but creatures of imbalance, parasitic forms that appear wherever consciousness falls asleep. When a person sinks into despair or rage, the astral body flares with chaotic energy. In that instant, invisible mouths open to drink what is released. Steiner saw in this the reason why so many feel drained, anxious, and disconnected despite physical health or comfort. The soul, he said, can bleed energy the way a wound bleeds blood. Each careless word, each indulgence in resentment, becomes a small incision through which light escapes. Humanity, unaware of this subtle process, has built entire cultures upon it. Entertainment that excites the senses without nourishing the spirit, constant noise that prevents reflection, competition that fuels envy. These are not accidents. They are patterns that keep the astral body in perpetual motion, generating the energy that the lower spheres depend upon. And yet, within this apparent vulnerability lies a profound secret. The same power that leaks can also heal. Every emotion, even the dark ones, holds energy that can be transmuted through awareness. When anger is observed without expression, it turns to strength. When fear is faced in stillness, it becomes insight. Steiner often said that spiritual development is not about denying emotion, but spiritualizing it, lifting its vibration until what once bound us becomes fuel for awakening. The human being, in this view, is a living alchemist. Through conscious thought, calm feeling, and disciplined will, we refine the raw materials of our soul into luminous substance. This radiant matter does not vanish into the lower realms, but rises toward higher hierarchies of being. The same currents that once sustained parasitic entities now become nourishment for the angelic worlds. It is the same energy, but redirected by the light of awareness. Imagine for a moment that every thought you have is a spark in an invisible field surrounding your body. These sparks do not vanish when you stop thinking. They remain, forming patterns that attract or repel forces according to their nature. Steiner called this field the aura, and within it, the history of your inner life unfolds like a living script. When a person dwells on resentment, the aura thickens with dull, reddish currents. When gratitude arises, it shines with gold. This is not metaphor in the poetic sense. It is an exact description of spiritual chemistry. Most people, Steiner observed, walk through the world unaware that they are continually radiating these invisible colors, contributing to a collective atmosphere that affects everyone. A city where fear dominates becomes heavy, gray, and stagnant on the etheric level. People there often feel tired for no reason, their vitality leaking through unnoticed pores in the astral body. You can feel it when you step into certain places. An unspoken density, a pressure that makes you sigh or crave distraction. These are not coincidences. They are the cumulative effect of countless unguarded emotions pulsing through human life. Now, consider how easily we feed these unseen networks. The moment you scroll through images that spark envy or arguments that ignite outrage, the astral body reacts. It expands, contracts, flares, and twists, sending out fragments of energy that disperse into the surrounding ether. Steiner warned that this is how modern humanity is being unconsciously harvested, not by machines, but by forces that thrive on untransformed emotion. The more intense the feeling, the more potent the energy released. Thus, a culture of constant stimulation becomes a feast for those unseen forms that depend on our agitation. But there is a counterforce, subtle and majestic, always waiting in the background. It is the power of conscious presence, the moment when one remembers, I am. In that instant, the human being ceases to be a mere emitter of raw energy and becomes a generator of light. The chaotic radiation of thought and emotion condenses, reorganizes, and forms a luminous sphere of equilibrium. Steiner described this as the birth of the higher I, the spiritual individuality that is no longer tossed about by collective moods, but stands as a radiant sun within the soul's universe. To reach this state, one must first notice the mechanics of energy loss in daily life. Why does anger leave you exhausted, while compassion leaves you renewed? Why does gossip drain your strength, while silence restores it? Each of these is a doorway to understanding the metabolism of the soul. Energy follows attention. When your attention is captured by what is beneath you, pettiness, fear, vanity, your energy descends. When you direct it upward, toward truth, beauty, and the effort to understand, it ascends. Steiner's exercises for concentration and inner stillness are not merely psychological tricks. They are methods for closing the leaks in the soul's vessel. Through this work, you begin to sense that spiritual energy is not given or taken by others. It circulates, transformed by the quality of consciousness. The same anger that once fed shadowy beings can be turned into clarity if one beholds it with awake perception. The same sadness that once drained you can become compassion when carried in the right way. Transformation, then, is not suppression, but transmutation, the art of refining vibration until it aligns with higher worlds. There exists a delicate boundary between the physical world that our senses can perceive and the invisible realm that interpenetrates it. Rudolf Steiner often described this threshold as a kind of veil, one that conceals but also protects. He warned that to cross it without preparation is like opening a door into a storm. One may be swept away by forces far stronger than the ordinary personality can withstand. Yet, for those who approach with reverence, discipline, and clarity of intention, that same threshold becomes a gateway to higher knowledge. Within the spiritual world, thoughts are not mere shadows of brain activity. They are living entities. Every idea, emotion, and intention radiates energy, forming subtle shapes in the etheric and astral spheres. Steiner taught that these thought forms attract beings of similar nature, luminous presences drawn to pure and selfless thoughts, and darker entities drawn to hatred, fear, or greed. Humanity, therefore, is not isolated. Each of us participates in a constant exchange with spiritual currents that mirror the inner state of our soul. This understanding changes everything. It means that morality is not a matter of abstract ethics. It is a force of creation. Acts of kindness, moments of gratitude, and impulses of love literally shape the substance of the unseen world, while envy, deceit, and cruelty distort it. Steiner described this interplay as a cosmic economy of consciousness. What we think and feel contributes to the harmony or dissonance of the entire human field. To develop a deeper perception of this reality, Steiner proposed exercises that train not only the intellect, but the will and the heart. Concentration practices refine the mind's focus. Meditative contemplation awakens the inner vision, and acts of silent service strengthen the moral substance of the soul. Through such disciplined effort, one begins to perceive subtle movements behind ordinary events, the quiet whisper of destiny, the invisible guidance that steers life's course. As perception deepens, the world reveals its true face. The mineral kingdom becomes a crystallized hymn of divine geometry. Plants shimmer with the vitality of the earth's etheric life. Animals embody soul qualities shaped by cosmic archetypes. The human being stands at the center of this grand symphony, capable of conscious participation. But to do so requires purification of motive, clarity of thought, and courage to confront the inner shadows that obscure higher vision. It is in this confrontation between the light of awareness and the darkness of ignorance, that transformation occurs. Every honest act of self-knowledge opens a window to the spiritual world. In silence, the seeker begins to sense that the cosmos is not distant, but breathing within every heartbeat, every gesture, every thought. And when that realization dawns, the veil no longer hides the world of spirit. It becomes transparent, revealing that the physical and the spiritual are two expressions of one living reality. When one learns to perceive beyond the surface of things, the world begins to speak in a new language, one not made of words, but of living symbols. Every event, every encounter, every accident carries meaning, woven into the tapestry of existence by higher intelligence. Rudolf Steiner taught that nothing in life is truly random. What appears as coincidence is often the visible trace of invisible cooperation between spiritual beings and human destiny. To understand this, we must first grasp that time itself is not linear as we experience it. The higher worlds move in rhythms and patterns that loop, echo, and reflect. A thought you have today may resonate with a force seeded lifetimes ago, and a challenge you face might be the echo of a forgotten promise. The spiritual investigator begins to recognize this continuity, not through imagination, but through an inner clarity that perceives the moral logic behind experience. There is, Steiner said, an economy of cause and consequence that governs the evolution of the soul. Each deed, whether noble or selfish, sets in motion streams of energy that return to their source. This is not punishment, but education, the universe teaching through reflection. Through suffering, one learns compassion. Through failure, humility. Through loss, detachment. The hidden wisdom of destiny guides the soul toward balance and harmony, even when the outer world seems cruel or senseless. As the student of spirit develops inner sight, he begins to feel gratitude even for pain. What once appeared as misfortune now reveals itself as a teacher in disguise. The world, with all its struggles and imperfections, becomes a vast school for the awakening of consciousness. And in this awareness, resentment dissolves, replaced by quiet acceptance and understanding that every trial refines the soul's light. But such understanding is not meant to lead to passivity. Steiner emphasized that spiritual knowledge must flow into moral action. To perceive the hidden meaning of life's events is only the first step. The next is to respond with creative participation, to heal where there is suffering, to illuminate where there is ignorance, to bring harmony where chaos reigns. This is how the human being becomes a conscious collaborator in the great work of evolution. The seeker who lives in this way begins to experience an extraordinary reversal. Instead of feeling small within an indifferent cosmos, he senses the cosmos alive within him. Each thought resonates through invisible dimensions. Each act sends ripples across worlds. Responsibility becomes sacred. The human heart, once closed by fear and selfishness, now opens as an instrument through which higher forces can work. This is the beginning of true freedom, not the freedom to follow one's impulses, but the freedom to align one's will with the divine order of the universe. In this harmony of action and awareness, the human being fulfills his original purpose, to transform the world not by domination, but by conscious love. And when that love flows unobstructed, the boundaries between self and world dissolve, revealing that what we once called destiny was never imposed from without. It was the echo of our own eternal essence, calling us home. There comes a moment in the spiritual journey when the seeker begins to sense the true architecture of human life, a living interplay between visible and invisible realms. The body walks through the streets of the physical world, but the soul moves through a landscape of forces, impressions, and influences that are largely unseen. Rudolf Steiner described this as a field of astral currents, a vast ocean in which human emotions, thoughts, and intentions flow like tides. Most people drift unconsciously within this ocean, carried by waves of collective fear, desire, and distraction. The modern world, with its constant noise and stimulation, has amplified these tides to a degree never before seen. Every image we consume, every conversation we overhear, every digital vibration entering our senses participates in this exchange of subtle energy. And because we are unaware of it, we become open vessels, absorbing what we do not choose, radiating what we do not intend. Steiner warned that this is the primary way human energy is drained today. It is not the grand tragedy that weakens the soul, but the small, daily surrender of attention. Each unguarded thought is like a doorway through which vitality escapes. A moment of envy, a spark of resentment, a flash of irritation, all of these are threads pulled from the fabric of the self. Over time, they weave a pattern of fatigue and confusion, and we begin to mistake this dullness for normality. To awaken from this state requires a new form of vigilance, not the vigilance of fear, but of awareness. The spiritual student learns to observe inner life with quiet intensity, noticing how certain thoughts contract the heart while others expand it. This observation becomes an act of purification. When we catch a negative impulse before it crystallizes, we prevent it from consuming our strength. When we transform judgment into understanding, anger into compassion, we not only protect our own energy, but subtly cleanse the collective field around us. Steiner called this inner discipline moral technique, the conscious shaping of the soul's atmosphere. Just as an artist mixes colors to create harmony on a canvas, the awakened individual learns to blend inner forces, thought, feeling, and will, into a balanced composition. This is not an abstract idea, it is a living art. Imagine entering a room where someone carries genuine peace within them. The air itself feels lighter. Such influence radiates silently, without words or effort. The one who practices this path begins to notice that outer circumstances lose some of their power. Noise, criticism, or chaos no longer drain as they once did, because the soul has established a center that the world cannot easily disturb. The person moves through life like a flame that bends with the wind, but does not go out. From that inner fire comes clarity, and from clarity, a quiet joy that does not depend on events. Yet this joy has nothing to do with withdrawal or detachment. It is an active presence, a luminous awareness that meets the world with full participation. The seeker understands that every encounter is an exchange of energy, and therefore every act, no matter how small, can become sacred. A look, a gesture, a word of kindness. Each can transform the field of life. Through such gestures, invisible wounds are healed, and the heavy atmosphere of the world becomes a little lighter, a little more awake. Once the soul has learned to preserve its own light amid the noise of the world, a deeper question arises. Why is this energy so valuable? What is the purpose of guarding it so carefully? Rudolf Steiner revealed that human energy is not merely a private possession, it is the raw material through which higher beings shape the evolution of the cosmos. Every human thought, feeling, and deed contributes either to the construction or the disintegration of the world's spiritual fabric. When we act with clarity, love, and conscious will, our energy harmonizes with the creative forces that sustain life. But when we succumb to mechanical habits, negativity, and indifference, our energy is harvested by destructive currents that thrive on human passivity. Steiner described this in terms of the Ahrimanic and Luciferic influences. The cold, materialistic pull of Ahriman that hardens the human spirit into calculation and control, and the seductive warmth of Lucifer that tempts the soul toward illusion and self-exaltation. Neither force is evil in essence, both serve as teachers. Yet when the human being fails to balance them through awareness, these forces begin to drain vitality. Ahriman feeds on the dull energy of unthinking routine, the endless scrolling, the mechanical repetition of words without meaning, the belief that the world is only matter. Lucifer, on the other hand, consumes the energy of false transcendence, the desire to escape reality through fantasy, pride, or spiritual vanity. Between these two poles, modern humanity is stretched and weakened, like a soul being played upon by invisible hands. The task, Steiner taught, is to stand in the middle, as the Christ being stood between light and darkness, uniting both through love. This balance restores the rightful circulation of spiritual energy. When the mind grows clear and the heart remains warm, the human being becomes a channel through which divine intelligence can work unhindered. Energy is no longer lost to conflict or confusion. It flows purposefully toward creation and healing. In this state, one begins to perceive energy not as something to hoard, but to consecrate. Every moment becomes an opportunity to infuse the world with consciousness. A simple act performed with presence. Washing dishes, walking through a crowded street, listening deeply to another human being, transmits an unseen force that nourishes life. The soul learns that to give energy with awareness is to receive it anew, multiplied and refined. This sacred circulation mirrors the beating of the human heart, contraction and expansion, giving and receiving. To live in this rhythm is to align oneself with the cosmic heartbeat, the pulse of creation itself. And when this rhythm becomes steady, fear loses its grip. The individual no longer seeks protection from the world, for they have become protection itself, a luminous sphere of balance, radiating quiet strength. Steiner often said that the spiritual world is not far away. It begins where selflessness begins. The moment we act, not out of compulsion, but out of conscious love, we step across an invisible threshold. There, in that subtle domain, every generous thought becomes light. Every understanding glance becomes nourishment for unseen beings who in turn guard and strengthen humanity. Thus, the energy we once feared losing is revealed as inexhaustible, because it is not ours to keep, but ours to awaken. As the soul awakens to this cosmic rhythm of giving and receiving, the world itself begins to appear in a new light. What once seemed heavy and hostile reveals hidden harmony. What once appeared random now discloses purpose. Rudolf Steiner described this shift as the spiritualization of perception, a moment when the veil of ordinary consciousness thins, and one senses the living intelligence within all things. A stone, once lifeless, now radiates silent endurance. A tree hums with quiet aspiration toward the light. Even the movement of clouds carries a whisper of intention. The human being, attuned to this silent symphony, begins to walk differently, no longer as a consumer of nature, but as a participant in its divine expression. Every breath becomes an act of communion. This perception, however, is not a gift granted by grace alone. It is cultivated through the moral purification of thought and feeling. Steiner insisted that clairvoyance without morality is dangerous, for it opens the gates to realms where illusion easily disguises itself as truth. The purified soul, by contrast, sees with warmth and humility, never with hunger for power. It does not seek visions, but understanding. It does not crave control, but participation. And in this state of quiet receptivity, something extraordinary occurs. Energy ceases to flow outward in wasteful dispersion, and instead forms a luminous core within the heart. From this center radiates an influence that reaches farther than the mind can imagine. It is the beginning of true spiritual service, not through preaching or persuasion, but through the silent transmission of presence. When such a person enters a room, tension softens. When they speak, even simple words carry healing weight. This is the path Steiner called the science of the spirit, transforming knowledge into inner substance, thought into warmth, and daily life into ritual. The act of thinking becomes sacred when it serves the evolution of consciousness. The act of feeling becomes worship when it unites rather than divides. The act of willing becomes creation when it arises from selfless purpose. In this way, every aspect of life, work, rest, conversation, even solitude, becomes an altar upon which divine energy circulates and renews itself. At this point, the seeker begins to sense that what drains the soul is not the world, but forgetfulness, the loss of this sacred awareness. To forget one's divine origin is to fall again into mechanical existence, to become prey for the very forces one once transcended. Thus, the real work of the awakened soul is remembrance. To remember light while walking through darkness. To remember truth while surrounded by illusion. To remember that even suffering is a veil stretched thin over hidden grace. And in this remembrance lies the deepest protection of all. For no matter how chaotic the outer world becomes, the one who remembers stands rooted in eternity. Their energy cannot be stolen because it flows from a source beyond the reach of shadow. They have discovered what Steiner called the indestructible center, the spark of the divine self, which neither Ahriman nor Lucifer can touch. It is the eternal flame that witnesses all worlds, yet remains unchanged, illuminating the path of those who seek to awaken.